Hello, my name is Matthew Geary, and this presentation will be on the variables that cause someone to be a high earner. So, what are some of the variables that cause someone to be a high earner? These are the variables for the regressions. So, the coefficients cannot actually be interpreted in a probit regression. And so, the only thing you are able to interpret within this regression are the signs beforehand. And so, for example, being black is associated with a decrease in the odds that you will be a high earner in this scenario. And yes, the reason that you can only interpret the sign is because it is within a normal distribution function. So regression results. So we'll go look over some of them. So if the p-value is less than 0.05, the variable is statistically significant. You can also use the 95% confidence interval, where if there's a 0 within the left side and the right side, then the coefficient is not statistically significant and does not help our regression. So for example, the first one, black, has a p-value of 0.046, which is less than 0.05 and does not have a 0. And so that is statistically significant. And the coefficient, once again, you cannot actually interpret this number right here. I don't know if the arrow is actually showing, but you can't interpret the negative 0.424 due to the fact that it's within the normal distribution function. So just looking at the first couple, we have being black is associated with a decrease in the odds of being a high earner. Being white also has it, but as you can see by the p-value, it is not statistically significant. And so if you keep going, we have age and h squared, which we know to be significant, and that's why we have h squared, because it is 0 p-value, which is less than 0.05. And yeah, and going to a private school has a positive before the coefficient. That means that when you go to a private school, it increases your chances of being a high earner. And that goes for all of the educations following. Right, so once again, just looking at it, if you wanted to take the z-scores, you can translate it and get a more interpretable coefficient for the interview, so you can actually set percentages and such. But just once again, looking at it, the ones that are not statistically significant look to be white and education, high school, as well as education, some college, and education AA. Otherwise, it looks like getting a BA, this advanced education right here, black and everything else looks statistically significant. And yeah, and just like before, we looked at the coefficients already and the signs and how you can interpret them. So moving on to just measure fits for probit models, there's only two. So rather than having an adjusted r squared, we have pseudo r squared. And so the pseudo r squared here is 0.225, which is actually 22%. That means that the variables account for 22.25, percent of the variance in the regression, which is slightly small. But then if we look at the fraction correctly predicted, which is essentially the new RMSE, it is the fraction of y's for which the predicted probability is greater than 50% when y equals 1, or is less than 50% when y equals 0. So essentially it's predicting between 0 and 1. And so it shows at the bottom right here, currently correctly classified as 95.04%, which means that 95% of the time our regression is correctly predicting whether it should be a 0 or 1, whether it should be a high earner or not a high earner. And so that is a great statistic because the cutoff is 80%. So that shows that we have a good guess for whether or not someone will be a high earner or a low or a non-high earner based on our variables. Thank you.